On today's episode, we discuss the inhospitable profession of public school teaching, analyze modern-day white man's burden, discuss why reducing the cost of insulin is worth all of the havoc that the Build Back Better plan would bring, and finally, we learn about why mocking the deaths of unvaccinated people is necessary. This is Cringe Post. Hey friends, welcome to the Cringe Post podcast. This is the podcast where we take and assemble all of the really cringy takes that we've seen on our feeds and you might have seen as well. And we assemble them into a show. We kind of pick them apart, say, hey, this is why they're wrong, provide arguments against them. We also do our best to steelman them. We want to provide the best perspective from the opposite side. So this is your one-stop shop for all the stuff in your feed that you might not be able to engage with on a daily basis. My name is Britt. I'm here with my co-host Donald. And before we get started, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps us out here. Going into 2022, we've got some cool goals, and we want to keep growing the show, and all of your interaction and support helps us a lot. Before we get into other people's cringe posts, we always like to feature one about ourselves, because the whole point of cringe posting and all that stuff is that you can actually get better, right? There's a floor for some people, and you can get better from there. And today we're going to show, I think this is one of the more worst ones for Donald, a tweet that he had in October of 2012. And Donald wrote, "Biden once again blaming Bush. I think responsibility is gone from politics. Hashtag VP debate." Man, it took till 2012 for responsibility to be gone.
That's the crazy thing is, like, leading up in 2011, that was responsibility incarnate. When you look at, the U.S.'s foreign policy, it was ownership after ownership of the catastrophes we'd caused. But in 2012, it was Biden who actually tipped the scales. Crazy.
I know, man. It's you, and right before the show, you and I were talking about how we really liked Paul Ryan, and we like these certain types of people, and we've had posts about like, oh, history will vindicate Bush and stuff, and it's just really interesting. Like, I guess as you go about life and you learn, like, oh, like, people are not inherently good, and then especially people with a lot of power, like, it kind of takes away the facade, right, that we have of our politicians and the view of our public servants, right? It's like, man, like, if I can't trust, the server at Burger King to not spit in my food, like, why would I trust someone given unlimited power, that can dictate how my life's gonna go? And I think that's kind of like, as you get older, you kind of see those things, and obviously we post less cringe things now. I just post less in general, but
yeah, right. Well, and to your example, I think proportionally, number of people who spit in food in fast food versus people who kill people, over protecting their own powers, the proportion not only is probably smaller in terms of sheer number, but it's also the ratio of consequences given is much higher to the people who spit in food, because they're found out more, they're fired, more drastic consequences, where in politics, you can either blame your predecessor on your current, don't take responsibility, or sometimes you get a medal for it. Sometimes you get awarded, and you have impressionable young conservatives saying that history will vindicate you for it. So
yes.
Go for it. Go ahead. Oh, well, I was just going to say, I don't know what specifically Biden blamed Bush for. It's hard to imagine he was blaming him for something other than foreign policy. Especially with, Obama's general, ticket. It could also have been economy or deficits or whatever. But the funny thing is, in either case, it really doesn't matter. Biden, basically, his whole career has supported the same kinds of policies that Bush put into place. So, Biden may have on paper said, I'm against this thing that Bush is speaking for. Or maybe Bush said, I'm against this thing that Biden is speaking for. But when it comes time to actually put policies in place or vote or pass things through committee or make bills or whatever whatever your position is, they actually kind of aligned on a lot of those things, whether it's foreign policy or deficit spending or whatever programs it was. So the idea of Biden blaming Bush is funny because, well, it doesn't matter if he blamed Bush. One, Bush probably was responsible to some degree, but two, Biden probably supported him for it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's always, the funny part about a lot of these politicians, especially the ones that were like in the Senate or in Congress or something like that, where they have they're supposed to have a voting record, right? Yeah. And that's why they don't want to vote, or be on record voting, because it will show that they supported something and it might be disadvantageous to them in the future. And this kind of brings me back to one of the things for me, at least, that made me want to start this podcast. Like, I had a family member who, during the inauguration of Joe Biden, saw a picture of George Bush, Bill Clinton, and Obama all standing together, at the inauguration. And my family was like, "Oh, like, I just think that's really cool." I'm like, dude, like, those guys have killed more people than anyone would ever accept, like, as an acceptable level to say that they're a good person in history. And they did it unilaterally without even, some of them U.S. citizens, right? And with impartial drone strikes without, being tried in a court of law or anything like that. And I think that was like the thing to me. It's like, hey, we got to like paint these folks as the blood-soaked monsters that they are, right? Millions upon millions of people have died as either direct or indirect actions of these folks. And we need to be able to like say why it is, right? And just state it as a fact because it is a fact. And because people will post things like, like you and I, like, history will vindicate Bush. It's like, no, Bush was a monster, right? And he might have been an idiot monster, but regardless, he a bunch of people are dead because of him. And this encourages me, right? When I see these, that's the silver lining. It's like, oh, like Donald Kimball, one of my very based friend today was, not so based just 8 years ago or whatever it was. So
yeah, well, I will take responsibility for my bad posts, and I will own up to them here on this podcast. This is my public self-flagellate, self-owning. I'll just go that route. I won't make it more visceral for you.
All right, moving on to our first cringe for other people of the day. We've got a post from someone, and they say, quote, "National teacher shortage," unquote, "is a fun way of saying that the USA has made a passion-driven job so ungodly inhospitable that even people who just care about teaching, not the money, don't even care about teaching anymore." It's I've been thinking about the teacher thing a lot as of late, and because there's like this weird thing about like, hey, we need to venerate our teachers, right? Same thing with like nurses and stuff like that. And like, yeah, like if you are sick and in the hospital, or if you've got cancer or something like that, like the most important person in your life is probably going to be your cancer doctor, your nurse, right? But outside of that, if you need your garbage taken away, the most important person in your life in that moment is going to be your garbage man. Same when your car is not working, anything like that. Any service that keeps your life moving forward or could drastically hinder your life or make it worse is very important. And I think the reason that teachers have this huge veneration thing for themselves is because like they get to grab hold of young minds like unilaterally for 8 hours a day from, grade whatever to 12th grade, and get to instill in them like, oh, you're supposed to respect me, and all these things. And it's like, I was thinking about, especially with this one, back in North Kitsap, we had a teacher. I was homeschooled, but I remember reading about this in the newspaper. And the conditions were so inhospitable to this person that he kept getting caught watching porn while he was teaching his class. That they said, "Hey, I can't have you teaching in the classroom." But because he was part of the teachers union and he had some sort of tenure, they weren't able to fire him. So what he would do is they set up a room for him where he could just watch porn or do whatever he wanted, and he would get paid. The taxpayer would pay him. That doesn't sound very inhospitable, to me. That sounds pretty awesome. Not that I would want to watch porn or anything like that, but like being able to just kind of go into a place, do whatever you want, and then people don't really care what you do, and you get paid a salary and benefits and all that stuff. I mean, I can't think of many jobs that would allow you to do that other than some government public job.
That's hilarious because that's literally one of the plot points in the comedy Silicon Valley. Like this massive tech company buys out this one guy because for his small idea or whatever, and the guy himself is an idiot, and he just kind of accidentally discovered this thing, and so they're like, you know what, we're gonna send you to the roof, and it's like this aisle of like people who are getting paid to stay at the company because they hired him for the name and then found out they couldn't actually do anything, and they just pay them to just chill out and hang out there all day. So it's literally the plot of a comedy. Like isn't this so absurd that this kind of thing would happen? And it was literally happening in our state. But you hit the nail on the head when you talk about the teachers union, because what strikes me about this is this was posted by someone I like a lot. They are not of my political persuasion, and they are married to a teacher, also not of my political persuasion, and they are, I think, proudly part of the union and defend the union. And it's like, okay, what do you think has made teaching so inhospitable in these past 2 years? Like, let's just kind of think, what's happened to the last 2 years? I think there was something kind of major that went on in the world, something about a virus. Oh, that's right. The virus that is not lethal or deadly to children, that the teachers union has consistently and constantly fought to shut down schools over, to force people to do remote learning, is what they call it, which is the school shutdowns. And so many teachers that I know and that I'm friends with, who they themselves are wonderful people. They care about their students. They try to put in the effort, usually younger teachers who are still passionate about their jobs, right? They haven't checked out. They don't have the protections from the union. They want to do the best, but the union screws them over because it forces them to do this remote learning, which is really hard on teachers because they have to prepare an entirely different curriculum. They have a lot harder time retaining students' attention. You even look at the learning scores, like from the standardized tests in Washington State. We just got those. My colleague Lee Finna just actually forced the teachers union to release them via Twitter, via pressure, which was great. Wow. And you look at the spring 19 scores for like English, and then you look at the fall 2021 scores for the same, like, English and math, and it's like a 15% reduction in overall, like, of number of students meeting the, like, acceptable level of, like, English literacy and math literacy. And so you realize that, like, these shutdowns and these terrible inhospitable conditions that they're referring to are created by the teachers union insisting on these shutdowns. Even our leftist governor, Inslee, is angering the teachers unions by saying we don't need shutdowns right now because they want to shut down the schools again. So it just, this person's complaining because they're like, just care about teaching, it's not the money. Like, it's this systemic, capitalist society problem. And it's like, no, the problem about the things that you don't like that's forcing teachers out are the conditions being set by the teachers union, who's more interested in hiring bureaucrats and so that there's higher union dues that go to the head of the teachers union, Randy Weingartner, and getting more headcount rather than actually providing teachers with the resources and support they need. So they always will hire more people because that means more union dues for them. They get more money, they get more power. And then when, it comes time to fire people, they just fire the last person who got hired because it's first in, first out, right? The person who's been here 10 years doesn't care about anything anymore, is completely burned out. They get protected by the union. The young teacher who's doing a really good job for their students, they're new, they're expendable, they're out.
Yeah, this reminds me, and maybe we've talked about it on this show before, but what job in society can you take 25% of the year off, right? Like, there's not many jobs like that allow you to do that. Because I have a lot of friends who are married teachers. I have a lot of friends who are teachers, and obviously I respect them, love them, care about them. But at the end of the day, it's a job, right? And like, you have to work. And yeah, there's things that suck about every job out there. And for people to put this sector on a pedestal of like, thank God for our teachers or whatever. Like, one, I don't really like the public school system or the government school system, so that doesn't really have my respect in that way. And then two, like, there was a study done, I think it was in 2017, where they compared, if you account for the amount of hours spent in education, the amount of money spent on education, and then the total amount of hours worked, including when a teacher like buys supplies and all that stuff, teachers make the same hourly wage when you compare it at the end of the careers as a doctor, right? They work half as many hours, right? And so they make half as much as a doctor, and they also, you don't have to do, you do about half as much schooling as a doctor does, right? But you make as much money as a doctor when you compare on a per hourly basis spread out over the career earnings. And you get, you get 25% of your year off. So, when these teachers say, well, we don't get paid enough, it's like, no, you get paid as much as a doctor. You just work not as much as they do. And you haven't done as much education. You don't have as special a skill as them. Once you equalize for all that stuff, it's about the same, which sounds like a pretty sweet gig to me.
Yeah, to put your point in sort of a silly analogy that maybe will later be a future cringe post for someone. It's like, imagine you have a town, and this town is like a coastal town, and you have to build up a dam just to prevent some of the walls or the water from rising up. And every day that dam needs to have maintenance on it, right? So you have Joe go out, and every day Joe goes out there, he works hard, he repairs the dam. It's not particularly excruciating work because he's doing it little at a time, but he maintains it, honest living, gets paid. And then one day, a supernatural water beast comes out of the water and is going to crash the entire town, but a superhero, John, freezes the monster and sends it out and protects the town from destruction. Now, he's done that in one day versus Joe, who's been repairing the dam every day. They both actually have the same end result, which is protecting the town from water damage, right? But the difference is that, so the value created by both of those people is the same, but the difference is the time scale for and the particular skill set needed in those instances. So the dam repair, it's a relatively simple job. You don't need a ton of specialization for it, but it takes time. You do it every day, and it's for the stretch you've saved from water damage. In the case of this aquatic sea beast, that takes a lot of specialization. Not everyone can do that. Only this superhero who comes out and freezes the water can do that. But the end result is the same in one day as this guy has done in 5-10 years. So you have to think about it like that, where, a doctor is saving lives and he's working so many hours in overtime to do that, and a teacher is creating value in education, but then is taking so much time off in blocks of the summer and things like that. So, but yes, like teachers have a hard job, and I don't think you or I would disagree with that. But like you said, there are always aspects to jobs. Like every job is not an equal slate. It's not like you think, all right, well, I'm making a business. I need to create a job here. That's not what you're thinking. I need this done, or this thing has to happen. And then that means, like, for instance, well, heck, if we want our, if I'm an internet utility company and I want our internet service to take off, then that means I have to have a repair crew who's ready to install in the summer, even though this teacher gets to take the summer off. They have to install. And guess what? This repair crew has to work at midnight to repair generators if power goes out, because we want this community protected or whatever. Like, different jobs are going to have different features of them just by the very nature that life is not equal. Thomas Sowell, in his book Wealth, Poverty, and Politics, talks about that in terms of geography, in talks of cultures, in time zones, and the ways that climate affects, and how there's inequality just based on where you live. The fact that people who live on a tropical area do not have the same kind of harvest rush that someone who lives in, like, the North American continent does. Because in North America, you have a very specific time when you can plant, a very specific time when you can harvest, and a very specific time when nothing grows and animals go into hiding. Whereas in a tropical climate, fruit and berries and animals, they kind of exist all year round. There's not really a harsh winter for them. And so just by that, there's inequality in time preference. So jobs, you can't think of it like this standard minted thing. Like, I have created a job in a package that you order from Amazon, you open it up, and they're all standard. Jobs require different things and needs. And one of the perks of a teaching job is the summer's off in our current system.
Yeah, your thing about inequality and kind of driving markets, like inequality from the standpoint of, like, hey, resources are not allocated, both in skill sets and in, like, actual physical goods and climate, and all those things are not allocated equally among everywhere, actually helps economies, because then it drives specialization. And when you have specialization, people come up with new ways to more efficiently harvest or use these goods. And it made me think of relating this back to the teacher stuff. Like, being homeschooled over in Kitsap County, like, we had these co-ops, right? And these college professors who taught college, like, I can't remember how many days, but they were part-time at the community college. Very, very good in, like, literature and science and all this stuff, and biology. They would do, they had, I think it was like 40 kids, 50 kids, and they would teach one day a week for, like, middle school age kids, and they would charge $250 a month per kid. Right. And so they were teaching one day a week and raking in tons of money. We were getting a really valuable service because I was literally getting a college level professor to, like, lecture and teach me about literature and biology and all this stuff. And, like, they worked less, right? So, like, what they did in that moment was they were able to bring their specialization in education, distill it down into something that was more than adequate, and actually gave way more value to homeschooling kids. And everyone won, right? Like, I only had to go to school one day a week for 3 hours. They only had to teach one day a week for 3 hours, and they raked in more money than they would rake in if they were teaching at a public school. But because we've got this government education system, we got the teachers unions and all this different stuff, like, it's their fault they are in the system that they are, right? Because they can't think outside of it. An entrepreneurial teacher, especially with the way that like public school systems are going and people exiting from it and going to homeschooling and other alternative educational platforms. If you're an entrepreneurial teacher, it's a huge opportunity, right? Like all you got to do is get 20 kids, 20 families that want to not have their kids in school, and you can teach them well 1-2 days a week and give them assignments. Like you'll make a lot of money and work not that much because you're providing a lot of value for a little bit of effort that people really want. And I think that's a pretty cool thing. But our education system doesn't teach that kind of thinking. It's not based in that. It's based on the Prussian factory drone model. So we can get into that later. But
well, the very quick last thing I want to say about this is, again, because they're talking about how the USA has made a passion-driven job inhospitable. But just remember that even alternatives to public education system that go through public funding, like charter schools. If you're not familiar, charter schools take public funding, like through property taxes and the things like that, but they let local communities build their own schools and take care of the needs of their immediate. So a lot of charter schools will exist for things like special needs kids or special communities, just because they're more need based and they're from the ground up. In Washington State, for instance, there has been a concerted effort to shut down these charter schools because they are going to, quote, drive students away from the traditional public education system. And it's like,
why would they leave?
Exactly. Why would they leave if you have nothing to worry about, right? So, and I'm not even blaming the teachers in the public schools in this case. Like, this is all bureaucrats. It's all teachers unions who don't want these outside teachers forming these charter schools to drive away their power. So don't say it's the USA. Put a name on it. It's the government and it's the teachers unions. They're the ones who are making it inhospitable, because even community-driven projects are trying to get stamped out to the point where they're not even getting money in some areas for heat when the building like loses power. Like they're that inhospitable to charter schools because it's not part of the certified, trademarked public education system, even though it runs on the same public dollar. So Don't blame it on some nebulous capitalistic USA culture. It has a name, and it's the teachers union.
Yep. That's good. All right, moving on to our next one. So this was posted back in, I think it was like May or June of 2020, right when the George Floyd stuff was going on. And this person posted on Facebook, "I'm finding it hard to focus today. Way too many thoughts and feelings and things I want to say. This is not about social justice. This is about human rights and the dignity of human life. If you don't see African American men in your workplaces, in your churches, in places of leadership, in your neighborhood, in Zoom calls, on your city council, in national leadership, then you're not doing enough. African American men need to be elevated in our society for the needed change to happen." And full disclaimer, I don't think this person listens to the show, but I really like this person. Like, great person. Really good heart and all these things. And I think that this is kind of a really good cringe post because like in the way that identity politics has hijacked good people's hearts to focus on the wrong aspect of the problem. Right. And I think we're, basically up until, this is about human rights and the dignity of life. That's good, right? Like, it's like, yeah, like if there's violations of human rights and the dignity of life, we should address that. But I think the problem with this whole post that you can see is African American men need to be elevated in our society in order for the needed change to happen. And it's like, okay, like that, how do we go about doing that then, right? Like, that's the question. Do we just put them there? Do we just make a law? Do we make a law that because they make up 13% of the population, they need to make up 13% of this and this and that? It's like, no, we don't really want that, because then you're forcing people to do things that they don't necessarily want to do. And then there's all these disparate outcomes that you're just making the problem worse. And then specifically, they need to be in national leadership. It's like, well, I'm pretty sure the last president in 2016 was, an African-American man. So what exactly are you talking about? And the problem with this is that it totally ignores the issue of like, hey, if you want to fix the issues in the African-American community, sure, we can debate about how we got here, why there are certain things that haven't happened. but like you need to fix the issue of personal responsibility and fatherhood. If you solve those two issues, then yes, you're going to see a lot more people coming out of poverty into, middle class stuff. And just by a factor of that, you'll probably see a more equitable distribution. I'm not saying you will, because there's cultural differences, right? There's cultural differences between what whites and blacks and Asians and Hispanics all want to do, and what their culture. I remember my band played a show at a church called Chinese Baptist Church. It's a Chinese immigrants had a Baptist church in Seattle, and I remember talking to the youth kids after the show. And one of the things I really like talking to kids about is like, hey, what you're about to graduate high school. What do you want to do? And I'm not joking. 99% of them said, oh yeah, I'm going to be an engineer or a doctor. Like I know that's a stereotype, but it's true, right? Like Asian families want their kids to go into high earning professions that are high stress. Me being Filipino, I know that for a fact. And that's why Asians make up, the top percentage of earners in the country. And so there's cultural differences that cause this disparate outcomes. And if you want to solve this problem or whatever, it's like, hey, if we do want to solve the problem of human dignity and human rights being trampled on. If you want to solve the problem of human dignity, you got to give people personal responsibility, right? There's a reason why the African American community has the largest single motherhood or single parenthood, factor in the country, like among races. How do we fix that? Yeah, there's a lot of reasons why we got there, right? You can blame Reagan, you can blame lots of different things. How do we fix that today? And it's sure as hell not saying, oh, like we just need to do affirmative action or some nonsense like that.
Yeah, I struggled reading this because I agree that I think the intent is really good, but I also think that the post reeks very dangerously of the white man's burden.
Yeah.
When you read, if you're not seeing African American in all these places of leadership, you're not doing enough. I'm not? Are you saying it's my job to be that kind of treads on that white man's burden a little bit, right? And I'm thinking like, well, I think the most generous interpretation is maybe speaking up against policies that they would find harmful and those kinds of things, which I will grant. But the problem is that there are ways in which I don't think this person does, but this kind of rhetoric makes lazier people slip into that sloppy thinking of just white people need to fix their society to get black people into positions of the only reason why you don't have more black people on city council is because the white man's pushing them down, kind of thing. You're like, ooh, that's a really dangerously racist idea. But yeah, and it's funny because that same kind of sloppy language. Okay, so here's a full disclosure thing. So my wife and I like to watch cringe shows on Netflix. We really do. And one show that we've enjoyed just laughing at and just like white knuckling, like this is so cringy, is this show on Netflix called Love is Blind. And if you're familiar, and so the concept is that there's all these different people, and it's not speed dating, but it's
exactly
like
what you're talking about.
Yeah, so for anyone unfamiliar, it's like a bunch of people that are kind of like in these pods, and they talk to each other, but they cannot see each other. Okay, and there's one couple that and after enough time you propose, and then you get engaged, and then afterward you see each other for the first time, and then you go spend like a month or two before you get married and see if the relationship lasts. So there's one couple that gets proposed. They've only spoken to each other, they haven't talked, and this was on the one that's actually in Spanish for some reason. But anyway, this couple they see each other for the first time, and they're both black. And they're both like, oh my gosh, he's black and she's black. And the guy says something like, I could have been with a white woman, but her being black, well, she'll just know, that being a black man, and it's just, I can't even articulate it. So you're like, okay, well, whatever. I'm kind of like, well, all right. But then she says something to the effect of, and this part, I don't remember, something like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he's black. But now I don't even have to talk about, just she says, the being white is a privilege. And it's like, whoa, that is really racist. Now to say that being white grants you certain privileges is one thing, and that's a claim that they would make a lot. But to say being white is a privilege is really racist, because you're saying that by the nature of being black, you are worse off, you are bad, you are worse. Being white is a privilege, and that to me was incredibly like derogatory towards her own culture. And I mean, like, you can argue that realities in society cause different effects. There's disparate outcomes based on the fact that I'm white. I might be scrutinized less than someone else, but there's also a number of other factors. The point I would make is, for instance, I may not get followed around in a 7-Eleven, but I also think that if I were dressed in, like low jeans, sort of ratty top, and with a sneer, I would probably be much more followed around than, say, someone like a black kid wearing what I'm wearing right now. So, there's alternate factors that do it. So anyways, but just to go back to my original point, the sloppy language here is what strikes me about this post, is saying that, like, you're not doing enough for all of these things. And that to me that's why there's this push, rather than to end harmful policies like the drug war, it's to enact policies to show that you as a white person are doing something about this. You can virtue signal and say, I support, artificially inflating numbers of black representatives, not based on what we need or their qualification, but based on an arbitrary thing like the pigment of their skin.
Yeah, I thought, so when you were talking about Love is Blind, I thought you were going to talk about Cameron and Lauren. So I don't, do you remember that one?
So it's been a while since I've seen that one. So Please go ahead. We did watch that though too.
Yeah. So it's funny, man. My wife and I do also like watching cringe shows. Like, we'll binge them and then be like, we won't even have to finish them. It's just like, I want to get my source of like, wow, I can't believe these people are so dumb and I'm so smart. Like, I want to.
There's a reason why we have a show called Cringe Posts.
Yes.
It's kind of in our blood.
Yeah, but so Lauren and Cameron, same sort of deal, except Cameron's white and Lauren is black. They're great. I think they're both Christians and very lovely people or whatever. And it comes time, I think it's after the first month is over, of them actually being together. And then it's like, okay, we're going to go meet each other's families. And Lauren, the black woman, is like, oh man, like, I'm kind of nervous to have Cameron come. Like, my dad just really doesn't like white dudes, And then they have like the little, the shot, like the interview shot with the dad talking about like, oh yeah, Cameron's white, and he's just saying some of those racist things. Like, if you just swapped like the adjective, like if it was a white guy talking about a black dude, like that guy would not be able to be in polite society, right? Based on the things he was saying, like, oh, I don't think he's able to understand or be empathetic, and like white people just are this way or that way, and all these things. That's like, dude. Like, you cannot say, that's like an ugly thing to say. And I think that's the problem with the whole identity politics, right? Like, it removes the aspect of personal responsibility from the individual and puts it onto the group and says, hey, your group is responsible for this. And, if people can point to a system and they say, hey, this system or this person did this thing because they think I'm inferior, like, yeah, like, let's address that, because that's wrong and evil. But that doesn't matter if they're white, black, Asian, Hispanic. It's like that stuff needs to be taken care of regardless, because that's not a good way to evaluate the world. It's not helpful, and it's just plain wrong. But if you can't point to it, and that's my favorite thing when people are saying, like, we've got systemic racism, right, in the United States. Like, okay, point to it. What is the system of racism right now? And I will support you in getting rid of it. But if you can't point to it, or if you don't even know about it, or if I know the system better than you do, and you're claiming that I'm racist, what does that say about you? And that's that's kind of the funny thing about these folks is like. And I think that's what's so hard about it is they're really well motivated because they see injustice, right? And they want to do something about it. But the only way they've been told to do something about it is this identity politics thing. And it's kind of unfortunate because it doesn't actually help anything. It makes things worse.
Right. And the last pitch I'll make is I think a lot of the people would point to the system of capitalism because that's what they're told by people like Ibram Kennedy and Kendi, excuse me. And they're saying that capitalism and racism are these conjoined twins. Now, these people will generally make a more nuanced argument, but most of the people who listen to them just associate those in their head. They don't actually think. So I will make a pitch for a project I work on called Free Markets Destroy. Look up on YouTube, Free Markets Destroy Racism. Yeah, I've got merch represent here. But Free Markets Destroy Racism, because as people will argue capitalism and racism are inherently linked, and you can see time and time again that's actually not at all the case. But speaking of
nice.
Sort of like...
I'll have to go read it.
Yeah, it's great. It's a video. It's really awesome. But speaking of sort of making assumptions based on an external factor, I think our next cringe is about that too, right?
Yes. All right. So here's our next one. It's 2 posts, 2 tweets. And a woman tweets, quote, "You put a man in a room full of women and he is excited. You put a woman in a room full of men and she is terrified," unquote. And then you have a reply from a dude, obviously simping, and he goes, "Men in here talk about, quote, not all men are bad, unquote. Y'all sound like the cops saying all lives matter, blue lives matter," shaking my head, clown face. I was, so we were talking about this before the show, but like intuitively, I remember growing up, like, I remember one in church, like this girl that I had a crush on came up and talked to me. And like, I was so anxious. I think I was about 12 or 13 that I literally couldn't say anything. So I just turned and walked away, and it was really embarrassing and all this stuff. And here's the thing, I'm married. I only need to be around one woman, and that's my wife. But like, if I was in a room full of women, like I still would be a little bit anxious, because you're like, you're out in unfamiliar territory with a bunch of people that don't have the same experience as you, right? And so intuitively, I know that. And I'm sure it's the same for women. And maybe there is, if a woman has some sort of background or has some notion about how men are, would be kind of nervous as well. But intuitively, I know that, like, regardless, if you're put in a situation where you're in unfamiliar territory with a bunch of people that aren't like you, that can be kind of anxiety-inducing. But I was like, okay, we need to have numbers to back this up. And so I actually looked it up, and there was a study done in 2014 across 18 countries and 31,000 participants. And it found that men and women in a room of their opposite gender or talking to opposite gender or anything like that have basically the same baseline amount of anxiety when it comes to interacting with the opposite sex, regardless of the situation. And I think that was enough for me to say, yeah, my intuition was correct, and this person is just operating off of some weird assertion and emotional appeal to emotion.
I like this because in the second one where he's like, not all men are bad, y'all sound like cops saying all lives matter, blue lives matter. It's really funny when people who are sort of inconsistent on, like, for instance, that they'll say things like, you need to accept the principle of what's being said here, right? So like, as a rule, and then you sounds like you guys are like the cops saying all lives matter, blue lives matter. It's like, wait, shouldn't you just accept the principle of that rule too? That like all lives matter, and like I guess the blue lives matter is a little bit more debatable one way or the other, but it's just kind of funny because on the one hand they'll be like, why can't you say black lives matter, or why can't you say that men would be or women would be terrified in a room full of men? Why can't you just say that? Say those words, like they've sort of got you in some kind of gotcha. And then you're like, okay, well, can you just say all lives matter or not all men are bad? And they just appropriately like, well, no, you can't say that either, because and it's just all semantics and word games at the end of the day. It's kind of why like generalizations like these, like, one, they're obviously not true, as you pointed out with that study and stuff. But it's just like, this is just such an unhelpful stereotype and generalization. It's like, for instance, if you were to you use the example of the cultural difference of the Chinese students at the Chinese Baptist Church, and your point was you were making like there are cultural norms and differences and things like that, but it would be, don't you think it'd be like kind of absurd to just in the abstract try to make a statement and just tweet out like, you ask a Chinese student what he wants to do, and he wants to be an engineer. Like, you'd get called out so fast by these exact same people. And then you just put out this general vagary that's incorrect. And then you have Mr. White Knight in here to come in and simp on behalf of all women. He's defending them against the not all men are bad. And the funny thing is, maybe to take this beyond what it actually is, because I think it's kind of a shallow cringe, but to take it all maybe a little bit beyond that is, the funny thing is, someone like you or I would say, actually, no, all men are bad, right? Actually, everyone is bad.
Yes.
Every person is bad. And
mankind.
Right, exactly. And it's like, that's almost why you need to recognize that fact, and you need to recognize we're in a fallen place, and you can't expect perfection of these people, and you can't crucify the people who don't live up to that expectation. It's like, yeah, like let's assume for the sake of argument that you do, that her claim is true. You put woman in a room full of men and she's terrified disproportionately. And it's like, okay, well, once we start playing that game, when does it become, all right, you put a man in a room full of women and he'll be the most productive member of society. It's like, where are you willing to put these things down, right? Like, stop.
That's actually kind of true.
If you look at the bell curve of sort of and it might, it's not necessarily always having to do with autism, but like if you look on this bell curve of autism distribution or just in general hyperfixation and specialization, on the low end of like totally lazy, totally disconnected are disproportionately men. You have the bell curve, you have women in that more reasonable rounded, and then you have that super hyper focused, again, sometimes autistic, and men are disproportionately autistic than women. And you have men there again. And so it's, you can make these generalizations, but they're just not really that helpful unless you're making a greater point. And again, you have to put it through the lens of no one is perfect and not everyone is bad. And so you can't just take the bad attributes of certain people, generalize it, put it on display everywhere, and then crucify an entire, like every single person for the sins that everyone has. I think it's kind of the same driving factor of people wanting to tear down statues of Robert E. Lee because he owned slaves, even though he didn't personally own slaves because he fought for the Confederates. And it's like, well, yes, every person is flawed. And if you ever want to have any person worth admiring or, laud any virtue, you're going to have to find a flawed vessel to do that in. And rather than making these broad, like anyone who's done anything bad ever is not worth lauding kind of statements like this.
Yeah. Your thing about the bell curve was bringing back up in my mind, when you compare average IQ, right? Like Jews generally have, I think it's like a 2 to 3% on average bump in IQ point over, the general populace, anyone else. And so that's okay, that's not that huge, right? Like it's 2 to 3%. But the results of that, right, on the bell curve means that the upper distribution of the bell curve is basically all Jews, right? So basically everyone that has the highest IQ, if you're going to take the top 10 people with IQs, 9 out of 10 of them are going to be Jews because of that 3% average boost, right? And so you kind of piggybacking off what you were talking about, like with the generalizations between men and women, it's like, okay, like men are in general more aggressive and they are in general more willing to work longer hours. Like that's pretty settled fact, like both from a psychology standpoint and just from a general in the workplace standpoint. And it's like, I think it's like 10 to 15% on when you look at the big 5 personality traits in terms of aggression. And then in terms of work hours, they work something like 20 to 30% more hours than women do. So you take that and then you apply that to the bell curve thing. It's like, oh, okay, that's why, right? Like basically all of the CEOs of companies are men, right? Like it's because of that distribution that causes that. And, yeah, there's generalizations and like generalizations when they're used to like push people down and make them feel awful and like cut and exclude them is a bad thing. But it's also a way of understanding the world, right? And when we understand that men are more aggressive, which we know they are, and they're more willing to work longer hours, that explains a reality we see that out there in the real world. And so I really laughed when you said, like, if you put a man in a room with a bunch of women, like, he's going to be the most productive he's ever been. And I laugh because that's true, right? Like, men have a desire to provide for people, right? Or to look like they are productive, and especially when it comes to, especially if the guy's single, right? If he's not single, maybe that doesn't matter, right? Like, I don't think I would care either way. But like, if I was single and wanted to find a woman, and you had me performing in front of a bunch of women, like I'd be like, I'm going to do my best job right now. Yeah. and we laugh because that's true, right? Yeah. Whereas like someone else doing this, you get the little snappy emojis or the little clap emojis because it's just like, it's their way of pushing a point. It's not because it's true. They just want to push their ideology. So that's all I got on this one.
Yeah, no, last thing, again, like you said, like when you're using the generalizations to point out someone's flaws or bad, like that's just not helpful. It might be true. Like, again, putting a woman in a room full of men, statistically not going to be more terrified. As a general precept, yeah, men are more aggressive, but it's still just like, I don't know. It's just like not a great helpful point that you're making, unless you're willing to crucify every single guy for being aggressive. But you, on the flip side, then have to crucify every single woman for flaws that the population of women may have more often than men. And I just don't think you're willing to evenly distribute that. And it's just kind of a lame thing to do. just in general, I don't know, be aware of generalizations, but to specifically crucify people for it is just kind of lame. And then and then of course Mr. White Knight is just kind
I
of
love
funny.
him.
So
Love him. You know, I hope he finds a woman, gets married, and realizes, man, like I didn't want a woman that believes these sorts of things. So
well, we can hope.
yeah. He's got to build himself into a person that's worthy of a person. That's what men are supposed to do. So
yes.
All right, moving on to our next one. We've got a blue check mark, Hakeem Jeffries. And he writes, the Build Back Better Act will cut the price of insulin from approximately $4,000 a year to $35 per month. Pass the bill. And what really got me about this one, like, let's think of an analogy, right? Like let's say the Build Back Better Act was a bill that said, hey, like, yeah, we're going to take insulin from $4,000 a year to $35 a month, but 1 out of every 2 people are going to need to take a bath in, you know, like in some poo water or something. It'd be like, oh, this isn't that good of a bill, you know? like I was trying to make it funny and lighthearted, but like, let's just say 1 out of 4 people had to have their left arm chopped off. It's like, okay, like, sure, that's one aspect of this bill, but what about everything else in it, right? Like, we're going to totally destroy our industry. We're going to print trillions of dollars, make it so that, yeah, insulin's $35 per month, but housing prices now have tripled or anything like that, or you've destroyed the life savings of people. Like, and this is like, I just can't stand it when people, especially these representatives, say we need to pass this huge bill that's this tall and 7,000 pages because it does this one thing for this specific group of people and it's maybe a good thing or advantageous to them. It's like, have you ever done cost-benefit analysis? Like, it just makes no sense.
Yeah, I'm also always skeptical when a bill says it's going to reduce the cost of something. I don't know the specifics. Maybe I'll look up and see if I can figure out why it's reducing the cost there. But if it's through more legislation, I'm always skeptical. Now, if you say if we were to repeal the FDA or if we were to repeal laws restricting the importing of drugs from Canada to reduce costs of things like that, then I'm a lot more likely to sort of buy into this. But the notion that like passing a bill, adding more laws is going to reduce the cost of something, at best you're shifting costs, right? When you add in a law that says you can't do this thing or you have to do that thing, you're only ever really pushing it. It's kind of like matter, right? You can't create or destroy matter. You can only change its forms. And that's kind of the impression I get in a lot of these legislative bills. So I might try to see how he's planning on reducing that cost. But, and then this is really minor, but he's obviously trying to make it the smallest number amount. So he goes from $4,000 a year to $35 a month. You're like, okay. And besides, if he'd done the year-to-year comparison, it would have been $4,000 a year to $420 a year. You could have gone from $4,000 to $400, and that would have been kind of a clean little marketing slogan. But he had to do the little switcheroo, make it to like, guys, it's from $4,000 to $35, and it's like your point still made $4,000 to $400, dude. It's just it's obviously small. It's not important, but
according to these people, $600 is a lot. So
yeah,
you know,
right. But it to me that just almost just shows just the little mind games they do even on Twitter. It's just kind of funny.
Yeah, we were talking about it before the show, but like Marjorie Taylor Greene was on Tim Pool's show, and she was talking about like when she first got to Congress, and like they were going to do like she was sitting in for her first vote on a bill or something like that, and she's like, yeah, then like the Speaker of the House said, you know, all people in favor say yay, and everyone said yay, and then some people said nay. And then she was like, okay, well, it passes, you know, and it hits the gavel. And she's like, wait, we're not going to take an actual like recorded vote on any of this stuff. And she's like, I haven't even read the bill yet, you know, and all this. And so she said the next time, you know, a bill came up to vote, she read it all, and she hired someone also to like help her read all of it and explain it to her, because it's like these are thousands of pages, right, for of stuff. No one's gonna read all that, and they sneak all these crazy things into it. And so she saw a bunch of stuff she didn't like in it, so she's like, hey, I'm gonna force a call. Everyone's got to like come in and do a vote on this, you know, like you got to do your job, you know, come in and vote on this thing and be on the record. And I just think like there's just so much trickery, right? Like you're saying, like the $4,000 to a year to $35 a month to the, oh yeah, I don't want to have to vote on this. You know, I don't want to be on record, so we're just going to pass it. And it's like, And to the fact, I remember Rand Paul was doing his thing. I can't remember when it was, but he was like, "Hey, I'm going to try and read through this whole thing, but they give us 4 hours, and I've got to read through this whole thing before it, all goes down." And it's like, you can't do it, right? Like, and that's what's so ridiculous. All this money that has been plundered from the American people, thousands of dollars per family per year, taken from us, and then they don't even know where it's going. Like, people just sneak it in there for their best interest. It's robbery at its worst, and that's why people say taxation is theft, right? And they're not wrong.
Well, and I mean, to the point of the to go back to the vote thing, like, remember when Thomas Massey forced the vote on the COVID package relief things? Because that was a huge like bailout for all these companies, non-COVID related measures, just total funding thrown in because they're like, oh, look, we can call it a COVID relief package. We can, throw a little carrot in front of the horse of the American voter to like them because we'll give you, $2,000 or $1,200, woo. And then they'll say anyone who's opposing it is evil. Remember, Trump got mad at Thomas Massey. He was patient zero for like death threats because he forced everyone to come in and do their job and vote. Like, nobody liked Thomas Massey except for maybe like Rand Paul and like me and you, right? And the other principled people out here, for doing that kind of thing. And it's insane what they get away with. Now, to the second point, a quick Google search revealed that, magically, costs don't just decrease on insulin when you pass this bill. It forces a $35 copay limit on insulin.
Oh.
So yes, in a sense, it does become $35 a month for the consumer in the immediate payment of it. However, as you or I know, insurance companies now take on the burden of that cost, which means they'll just negotiate with doctors to raise the prices artificially, and then the doctors and the insurance companies will go to Congress and get more funding to bail out all of the money that they're losing in revenue back from our taxes. So no, it does not go to $35 a month. It's one of those things that's very deceptive. It's very hard to tell someone that, is living paycheck to paycheck that, insulin is like going from, this would make it $35 on your copay, but it's really hard to tell them that actually, the entire wealth of this country and like gets absorbed and small and the potential growth gets completely shrunk, and you are in a worse off position for this. And it's really hard. It's just like the $4,000 a year to $35 a month. It's one of those deceptive things that, legislators do with their bills is they push costs elsewhere that are inefficient, drive things up, and then people vote in what's in their quote self-interest, just like that classic Bernie post we had in our top 10 in our first show, and they vote for that. It's kind of like the temporary tax increase thing. Whenever you see on your ballot, it's like, do you want to support firefighters or do you want to support schools? This is a temporary tax. Will only go for one term, and people, I can do a temporary tax. I'll vote yes, and then it passes, and then the next year they're like, do you want to maintain this tax? It's not a new tax. You already pay this one. Oh, I don't mind. I already pay it. And then you keep a new tax forever that way.
Yep. I don't got any more in this one unless you do. It's just so dumb.
We're good.
Cool. All right, our last one of the day is from another blue check mark. It's Michael Hiltzik. Do you know if that's the right way to pronounce his last name?
I'm not sure, but that looks right to me.
Okay, cool. I don't know who this is. Apparently, he writes for the LA Times, and he tweets out his article for the LA Times. Mocking anti-vaxxers' deaths is ghoulish, yes, but necessary. And what an ugly thing to say, man. I just we've seen a few of these on our time on the show, between, people not rejoicing at but I guess they kind of were rejoicing at DeSantis's wife getting breast cancer, or wishing that, instead of her getting breast cancer, that DeSantis got cancer, and all these sorts of things. And it's like, okay, we are supposed to believe that these are the empaths of our society, the people that are the most empathetic, the people that are really sympathetic to, the downtrodden and all these folks. It's like, I haven't read this article. Maybe you did, and so the contents of it. But I'm assuming that it's necessary to mock anti-vaxxers' deaths so that they can shame people and scare people into taking the vaccine. It's just what an ugly. You couldn't say this about anything. Should I fat shame people because if someone dies from some sort of heart disease, it's like, yeah, I should mock them for being fat because it's ghoulish, but maybe it will motivate someone that is fat to work out. Like, no one ever says that's a good thing to do. Yeah, sure, maybe it would help one person. I'm sure it would help one person, get better and more fit, but that doesn't make it a good or right or empathetic or human thing to do.
What is absolutely crazy about this, I can't remember, and I wish I could find it. I saw it in passing and I wanted to pull it up, but I couldn't find it in time for this. But this very same person tweeted, he was one of those accounts who tweeted in the early Trump days, well, not early Trump days, but the early days of COVID with Trump in office, something about him refusing to take the Trump vaccine. He was one of those.
What?
And now he's saying that you need to mock anti-vaxxers' deaths because it's necessary. And you're like, so not only are you justifying, and I would say that not only is this an evil thing to think that, mocking anti-vaxxers' deaths is good or necessary, but to recognize that it is ghoulish, to recognize that it is an evil thing, and then still say that it's needed or permitted, that almost makes you worse, maybe. Like, that's like saying, well, yes, we understand that, Bush and his administration lied us into war, and that meant the direct result of killing children, but it was worth it. Or the Madeleine Albright quote of, we think the costs were worth it, after the 500,000 or 500 million, or I can't remember the exact number of children
500,000,
deaths. 500,000, 500,000. Children deaths. Like, knowing the evil that you've done and then saying, well, yes, I recognize that it's evil, but it's necessary. That puts you in a special kind of psychopathic, especially when you were literally in that camp just because of the guy, because Orange Man bad, and so I'm not going to take his vaccine.
See, this is the terrifying world of, the terrifying moral framework of these type of people. I was thinking about this today, I was thinking about eminent domain, like most people think about when they're driving, because I was thinking about highways and eminent domain. And for those of you that don't know, eminent domain is basically like, hey, if the government or local government, whoever thinks it's necessary to build a road through some place and your house just happens to be in the way, they can come in and say, hey, we're going to give you fair market value for it and take it from you. And I was thinking about that. I was like, man, like that, I've known a few people that have had that happen to them that didn't want to sell, or they had issues where like they bought it like in 2006 and then they needed eminent domain in 2008 or 2009 when the market crashed. And so they're going to get below the value of what their house was, which is kind of awful. So they're going to be underwater. And I thought, man, how can we ever say that that's a good thing to do? And what people would say is that, well, it serves the needs of the many, right? The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Therefore, the ends justify the means. And yeah, it's not necessarily a nice thing, but more people are going to benefit. So it's okay if we sacrifice people on the altar to this. And that's what these people believe. They don't believe in any sort of deontological, moral framework where it's like, hey, like there is a right and there is a wrong, and there's a right way to get to something and a wrong way to get to something. And if you choose the right way, like then it is right. If you choose the wrong way, but the end is right, in one way or desirable, that still makes it wrong, right? And I think that's kind of like the bedrock of what a healthy society is built on. But these people don't believe in that. They believe in, we want to have this outcome at the end of the day, and if we don't get this outcome, then it's wrong. And so whatever we have to do to get there, even if it's mocking people's deaths, even if it's forcing people at gunpoint to get a vaccine in their arm, even if it's mandating to companies that you have to fire employees if they don't get this, taking away livelihoods, that's okay. That's the price to pay. You got to break some eggs to make an omelet, so we're going to do it. And that is what is so scary about this. Even if it's only 5% of the population that holds this moral framework, like that's a significant amount, right? And they're willing to do anything that they need to get to the world that they think they want to get to. And maybe we've talked about it on here before, but I remember talking with this gal, and we were debating about some moral framework, and I was like, well, we need to establish like what we say is evil, right? Would you say that murder, when a person is going and killing another person for no really good objective reason, would you say that's evil? And she's like, well, it depends, like I could see it's okay in certain aspects of overpopulation. And I thought, oh my gosh, there's no way that me and this other person could ever have a conversation. We have totally different views about what is good, moral, and acceptable. She believes that we could, murder is acceptable if it's going to serve the greater good for other people, right? Like we should kill an innocent person to serve the rights of the many. And even if only 5%, like I was saying, of the population holds that view, I think we're in for a lot of trouble because there's no end to what they would do. And they kind of like, I think it was Tolkien, I can't remember who said it, but they were basically like, hey, like beware of the tyrants that think they are persecuting us for our own good, because they'll do it without ceasing and they will do it without tiring. And that's, I think we're heading into a generation that has a lot of that.
Yeah, I think that's the C.S. Lewis line.
C.S. Lewis, okay.
Yeah, the dictator who thinks he's doing it for your own good. Yeah, wild. I mean, such an insightful man, and such a good point to that. And what's crazy is that that's the particular article that this particular article is referencing posts based on an attorney who was opposing vaccine mandates, and there were a lot of mocking of her death. And what's crazy is that it's, to me, like that is the exact embodiment of the two differing ideologies, where he is saying things like, you need to mock this person in order to enact the agenda I want, right? This whole idea that you're talking about, where we're going to do this thing to you because, whereas her thing is she made this sacrifice while still, and I'm sure if you asked her on her deathbed, she would still believe that this should not be a mandate. This should be a free, voluntary thing. And that's wild. Now, I do want to make one correction to my own thing live here on air. Cringe Post tries to keep ourselves accountable. His original post, I looked up because I saw just the tweet, and sometimes tweets can be taken out of context like this one was. His article was arguing the previous one where he said that people were going to die, that the tweet read, Trump is plotting a vaccine debacle for November and people will die. And his really lame argument is that the vaccine will be rushed, which will undermine public confidence in it, which will make people anti-vaxxers. So he's always been against anti-vaxxers. I will credit him that. However, that's really stupid, because if Biden did the same, he would say he's a hero. He rushed out the vaccine as soon as he could. And if Trump delayed the vaccine, he said we could be releasing a vaccine right now. He's killing millions. It's a lose-lose, and people like that, they want to control the ends. They want to dictate your life for you, and the pesky facts don't matter. Orange Man's in the office. He wants to kill you because it's rushed. Or it took too long. Or what do we need to say here? Because Orange Man wants to kill you. That's the agenda. Don't mind the facts. And yeah, an anti-vaxxer died, and people are seeing that when people make fun of that, that's turning them off of it. So we need to justify this behavior. So we need to continue the behavior of mocking anti-vaxxers. That's the outcome we need. Yeah, it's ghoulish, but it's necessary. Let's make that argument. It's disgusting. It's manipulative. And of course, this person's a journalist.
Yeah.
That's what I'll say. And I apologize if you're a journalist. Yeah, right. I apologize if you're a journalist out there. There are some good journalists. Not all journalists are bad, as a generalization to throw out there.
Yeah. It's really sad. Like, and I think maybe some of this is with the internet, like these people, I don't know, you're not really a UFC fan, right? Like you don't watch much of that. Okay. Well, what's kind of, I'll have to send you this post after, but there's this guy named Paul Felder. He's a UFC fighter. He was like number 5 or 6 in the world at one point. Really killer good fighter. Anyways, he lost. And on Twitter, some dude who's kind of fat was making fun of him. He's like, "Oh, Paul Felder sucks." And then Paul Felder commented, he was like, "Would you say that to me, like if you were here, like right in front of my face?" And then the fat guy commented, he's like, "Nope, but that's why I'm on Twitter. Like I can say things to you." And it was so funny because it's like it's so true, right? It's like these people can say things to a UFC fighter they would never dare say to them in front of their face. And I can't help but, and I hope that Michael Hiltzik, this LA Times writer, I hope that he doesn't actually believe this, right? Like I hope that he doesn't believe it's good to mock anti-vaxxers' deaths. I hope that he just has the courage because he can say it from behind a keyboard, because and I hope a lot of people that are saying these sorts of things aren't that way, because if they are, they truly do believe that, they're in for a world of trouble. And I think there's a lot of reckoning of our souls that is going to have to happen if we're going to make it out of this.
Agreed. I don't have any more. I think we're good.
Cool. Awesome. Well, folks, thanks for hanging out with us tonight. If you, I guess, when you listen to this, it could be this morning. So whenever you've listened to it, thank you so much. Before we sign off, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us out a ton. If we said anything that made you cringe, if you have any feedback on our show, shoot us an email at cringepostpod@gmail.com, or you can also comment on one of our social media platforms at cringepostpod. We're on all of those. And yeah, we'll catch you next time. See ya.